Michael Cohen has not spoken publicly since the end of the Mueller probe, and his legal team has been quite tight-lipped. His advisor, Lanny Davis, no stranger to the camera when warranted, has yet to give a single television interview until tonight. I'm happy to say Mr. Lanny Davis is with me exclusively. His client, Michael Cohen, could be central to Mueller's final report. Think about it like this. We now know Cohen was the next to last person to be charged in the entire probe back in November for lying to Congress. It was 2 months later that Roger Stone was the last person charged in the probe. We also know Cohen's involvement with Trump Tower Moscow, that deal during the campaign, did not ultimately trigger any conspiracy charges by Mueller. We do not know if any other leads provided by Cohen could lead to charges in other open cases. Lanny Davis is my guest tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ari.
When you look at the end of this probe, was your client Michael Cohen, and were you surprised that Mueller finished without finding a chargeable conspiracy?
A bit surprised that he allowed Mr. Barr to misstate his report without his getting his own characterizations out first. That's what I would have advised him. The misstatement of Mr. Barr, which is most disappointing for a lawyer with a good reputation, is no, there was no exoneration. Indeed, the exact sentence quoted by Mr. Barr was that there was no exoneration on obstruction.
On obstruction.
And we don't know what the level of proof necessary to at least accuse a president of the United States of the crime of colluding with a foreign government.
Well, let me push you on that.
And that is a high standard, so we don't
certainly
exactly know
a high
what
standard, but let me push you on that for our learning. You've been very close to this, and we've relied on your legal expertise. If a conspiracy involved multiple individuals, by definition,
correct,
it would be possible, had Mueller found chargeable evidence for conspiracy, to charge other multiple people without the sitting president.
Well, we're going to have to wait for me to answer your question, Ari. As much as you know, I hate to do this. I believe Michael Cohen has a story to tell about what he told Mr. Mueller that leads to strong inferences of knowledge about the Trump Tower meeting, which was by definition collusion.
Does Mr. Cohen look at all this, as I mentioned, him and Mr. Stone being the last people charged? Does he feel like, with all the other information that's come out about other individuals, that in a sense he's holding the short stick here?
Yes, and let me give you 3 quick answers. One, it's very rare that somebody volunteers to testify before Congress laying out documentary evidence of crimes by the President of the United States. The writing of the $35,000 check signed by Donald Trump is evidence of a crime of conspiracy to violate the very crime that the federal prosecutors said was directed by President Trump. Second, the book that was just published about that testimony lays out the documentation behind Mr. Cohen's testimony of crimes by the President of the United States before and after his presidency. And finally, his son, along with Mr. Weisselberg, the chief accounting officer, chief financial officer, excuse me, signed a check in March of 2017. Mr. Trump signed it 8 months into his presidency for $35,000, a payment for hush money under a criminal conspiracy. Donald Jr. is not president. Neither is Mr. Weisselberg. Why have they not been indicted? They signed a check that was a part of an implementation of a criminal conspiracy.
Those are open issues in SDNY?
There is no question that there are open issues. Mr. Cohen is fully cooperating with the Southern District of New York and is offering more information that he's now discovered when he's retrieved back his cell phones and other documents from the Southern District.
Are you suggesting
he's working with Congress.
Additional evidence beyond what he laid out in his congressional testimony?
That is correct, and he's also have additional information for the Southern District involving criminal behavior that needs to be looked into. So we'll just have to see.
Let me get you on Mr. Barr, a fellow member of the bar like yourself in Washington, a rarefied group. I know you all know each other to some degree. He has language that many people are intrigued by in the latest letter about what he'd hold back. He says he would hold back information impacting peripheral third parties in the Mueller report. Lanny, number one, do you think that could include Michael Cohen? And number two, if so, would you or your client say that you want to waive any attempt by Mr. Barr to redact things involving Mr. Cohen in the final report by Mueller?
Well, I have to consult with my client to answer a question about my legal advice to Mr. Cohen. But I would say that since Mr. Cohen has pled guilty to a crime that prosecutor says was directed and controlled by the now President of the United States, who just wrote a hush money payment, and on national television we saw his signature from his personal account, I would say that Mr. Barr has a question he should answer. Why hasn't Mr. Trump's son and his chief financial officer been indicted for writing those hush money payments and the cover-up scheme that had Michael Cohen writing the check for hush money for Miss Daniels rather than
such a big,
Mr. Trump?
Big question, and like a good lawyer, I suppose that's what you're good at, right? The question you raise is really burning here, which is, given the financial documentary evidence that you mentioned, if it was a crime, as Mr. Cohen confessed in SDNY charge, what was the difference at all between Donald Trump Jr.'s role and Mr. Cohen's role? They both would be seeming to be misleading about the funds for the beneficiary, then candidate Trump.
Well, that is a question that mystifies me that the American mainstream media isn't asking. We put up a check. A president of the United States committing a crime while president, and not one Republican during the hearing of Michael Cohen asked about that check. Now Don Jr., who's not president, no problem indicting him. Mr. Weisselberg was given immunity while Mr. Cohen was forced to plead guilty for doing what Donald Trump told him to do with Mr. Weisselberg. Is that a disparity of justice here? We're working with the Southern District. We hope that they will move as aggressively in uncovering these crimes that Michael Cohen is presenting them with evidence of, so that at least the American people get to know the truth about a president of the United States who not only committed fraud and other crimes before he became president, but again, I keep repeating with total mystification, he wrote a check while he was president implementing a criminal hush money scheme involving an affair with an adult film star. And the government, the prosecutors said he ordered Michael Cohen to pay that money to Miss Daniels, and it was part of a cover-up because he would make the payment, not Trump. 3 days before the election, there's no question there was political motivation, making it a crime.
Well, and as you say, the money ran through the Trump Organization as misdescribed corporate funds, the jurisdictions in New York. We will keep reporting on that. That's why we try to go back to the sources on both sides of these things. Lanny Davis, thank you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.